Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, I think, the fundamental question about what it means to be human.
It really is the big one, isn't it?
It's one of the oldest, most consequential questions in philosophy, theology, and, modern psychology too. Are we deep down fundamentally good? Are we fundamentally evil? Or are we just something else entirely?
Like raw potential, a blank slate just waiting to be shaped by the world.
Exactly. And it's a question that doesn't just, entertain us. It touches the very bedrock of how our societies function.
Hmm. As the source material you've gathered for us shows, the paradox we're all wrestling with is just, it's striking.
Absolutely. When you look at human history, or frankly, just turn on the news for 5 minutes, the spectrum of our behavior is staggering.
It's whiplash-inducing.
It is. You find evidence of the most radical self-sacrifice, profound compassion, people creating immense beauty through art, and this deep, lasting love.
Yeah.
And yet, right alongside that, existing in the same species.
You have the darkest human capacities.
Yeah.
Systematic cruelty, genocide, endless war, calculated cold betrayal.
That juxtaposition, the angel and the monster in the same skin, that's the core driver of this entire investigation, isn't it?
It is, and that contrast really explains why this is anything but some abstract philosophical game for academics in an ivory tower.
Right.
The way we answer this question, or even just the answer we lean towards, provides the foundational assumptions for every single structure we build.
How so? Can you break that down?
Well, think about how we design our political systems,
No.
how we administer justice, the ethics we try to promote, and crucially, how we educate the next generation.
Okay.
If you start with the assumption that humanity is inherently malicious, that we're fundamentally broken, what do you build?
You build a state based on fear.
On fear, on surveillance, and on overwhelming restraint. It's the only logical path. But if you start with the assumption of inherent goodness, then you're building systems based on trust, on liberation and maximal freedom. You're trying to get out of the way to let that goodness flourish.
Two completely different worlds
Yes.
stemming from one single philosophical assumption. So our mission today, for you, is a true deep dive. The sources you provided pull together arguments from across millennia and disciplines. We've got insights from ancient Eastern philosophy. We've got the hard data of modern developmental psychology. It's all in here.
And our job is to extract the essential nuggets of insight from all these different perspectives.
We want to offer you a shortcut to understanding the complex, often contradictory answers to this ultimate question of human nature.
And what's so fascinating here, looking through all this, is the sheer variety of answers that different eras and cultures have come up with.
It's not one single conclusion.
Not at all. And the sources really suggest that the debate is maybe less about finding a single universal truth about our nature and more about defining the true breadth and boundaries of our potential.
Our potential for what?
Our potential for everything, both the good and the evil. So to make sense of this sprawling material, I think we should start by framing the three primary viewpoints that really underpin this entire discussion.
Great idea. So to navigate this huge philosophical and historical landscape, we need a clear framework. And our sources establish these three main and often competing theories about what human nature actually is.
Right. Let's start with frame one. This is the basically good view.
The optimistic take.
The deeply optimistic take. The core tenet here is that the natural, original tendency of humanity is toward empathy, cooperation, and care.
So if you could just strip away all the negative interference.
Exactly. If we were left in a state free of that, we would naturally choose the path of cooperation and harmony.
So in this view, if you peel away the wounds, the bad conditioning from society, the misinformation, you find something inherently noble underneath, something geared toward the good.
That's the critical component. In this view, evil actions are seen as, well, as aberrations. They rise entirely from external factors.
Not from within.
Not from the core. These actions, they stem from ignorance, social distortion, personal trauma, or just plain bad resource-scarce conditions. Evil is not the essence of the human being. It's an unnatural state. It's something that has blocked or wounded the original noble self.
Okay, so that's frame one, which brings us inevitably to frame two, the stark counterpoint.
This is the basically broken or evil view. This perspective posits a built-in and intrinsic tendency towards selfishness, pride, aggression, or moral corruption.
So this isn't saying we're all plotting evil all the time.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But it does imply a kind of moral gravitational pull, a pull toward destruction or self-interest that is just baked into our design.
This perspective sounds like it's defined by a sort of structural pessimism.
It is. It argues that there's something fundamentally wrong or dangerous in human nature, a flaw, a crack in the foundation that needs powerful external restraint.
What, a radical transformation?
Or perhaps a radical internal transformation that only outside help, like divine grace or redemption, can actually achieve. Goodness, from this standpoint, isn't our default setting. It's a hard-won achievement against our natural inclination.
And it's always fragile.
Always.
Okay. And then we get to frame 3, which tries to, I guess, synthesize or escape that binary. This is the blank slate or mixed potential view.
Right, and this is the position that views the human creature as radically complex and flexible. The core tenet is simple. Humans are profoundly capable of both soaring good and terrifying evil.
And what decides which one comes out?
Context. Context matters enormously in determining which drive dominates.
This view emphasizes our plasticity then. We're born with a toolkit that includes both selfish and cooperative impulses.
And evolution gave us both for a very good reason.
Because both were necessary for survival.
Exactly. And the environment, our culture, our social structures, they essentially act as filters. They determine which of those inherent tendencies gets expressed, which gets amplified, and which gets suppressed.
So just to synthesize these for you, the learner, in a more nuanced way than just simple labels.
Frame 1 suggests an internal nobility that needs nurturing to overcome external distortion.
Frame 2 suggests a dangerous internal inclination that needs external structure or transformation to control it.
And frame 3 suggests we are defined by a complex duality whose ultimate expression is decided by the world we build and the choices we make within it.
So let's unpack the evidence. Let's start with the optimistic one, frame 1.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we begin by unpacking viewpoint 1, the argument for fundamental goodness. I think this often surprises people because they assume this view requires you to just ignore history, ignore all the atrocities.
Oh, to be willfully naive.
Exactly. But this perspective actually draws its evidence from quiet, persistent, daily realities and these deeply wired moral instincts we all seem to have.
The initial argument for basic goodness is so often missed precisely because it's the background hum of human existence. It's everyday cooperation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. If human nature were inherently aggressive and purely selfish, society as we know it, institutions, trade, communal living, it would immediately collapse.
It would be that Hobbesian war of all against all.
Instantly. The simple fact is that the vast majority of people, most of the time, are abiding by these incredibly complex, unspoken social contracts. They are not committing violence.
We just take that for granted. It's the background noise of decency.
We do. When a tragedy happens, our attention is lasered in on the shocking event. We don't focus on the hundreds of people who rush in to help, or the strangers who offer support, or the fact that billions of transactions occurred safely today without fraud or violence.
Yeah, it's a powerful point.
And beyond just, basic compliance, we seem to be equipped with these powerful, spontaneous moral instincts. Our sources highlight empathy and moral emotions, guilt, shame, distress. Unless an individual is, say, sociopathically disturbed, they feel bad when they harm others. And conversely, we are naturally drawn to and we admire acts of kindness, courage, and fairness. It's like an innate mechanism that rewards cooperation and punishes transgression through internal discomfort.
Okay, but I have to push back on that a little bit, playing devil's advocate from the frame 2 perspective. How is a human saving a stranger different from, say, an ape protecting its troop, or a lion defending its territory?
That's a fair question.
Isn't that cooperative behavior just a highly evolved, genetically advantageous form of self-preservation? Not true goodness, but a really effective biological strategy for group survival.
That's a crucial challenge, and you have to take it seriously. If we look only at the mechanics of it, yes, cooperation is advantageous. But what the frame 1 philosophers argue, and what modern psychology seems to support, is the extent of that empathy.
It goes beyond the immediate group.
Way beyond. We are capable of extending care beyond our immediate family or kin group, sometimes even to abstract ideas of justice for people we will never, ever meet.
That's true.
The ability to feel pitié, what Rousseau called pity or compassion, for a completely unrelated suffering individual, goes beyond pure kin selection. It suggests an innate moral orientation that is, if not unique, then at least uniquely developed in our species.
Philosophically, this view finds one of its most compelling ancient articulations in the Confucian tradition, specifically the teachings of Mencius.
Right, around the 4th century BC, and rather than arguing that humans are born perfect, which is a common misconception, Mencius argued that they are born with specific moral ingredients.
Sprouts. He called them sprouts.
He detailed the concept of the 4 sprouts, or seedwan. These are inborn moral seeds that are present in every single human being, and they just need cultivation, like a garden.
What are those 4 sprouts specifically? I find that such a fascinating nugget of knowledge.
They are, first, you have the sprout of compassion, which, if cultivated, leads to benevolence. Second, the sprout of shame and dislike, which leads to righteousness. Third, the sprout of courtesy and deference, which leads to a sense of propriety. And finally, the sprout of right and wrong, which leads to wisdom.
And his famous example.
Is seeing a child about to fall into a well. Mencius argued that anyone at all would instantly feel alarm and pity, not because they were trying to get in good with the child's parents or get a reward or win praise from their neighbors, but because the reaction is just innate. It's a gut feeling.
I'm really struck by the fact that this ancient philosophy is being, in a way, supported by modern developmental research. What is the psychological connection between that sprout Mencius talked about and our modern understanding of how babies develop?
It's a really strong connection. Modern psychology corroborates this instinct for attachment and fairness. For instance, developmental evidence suggests this cooperative drive is active very, very early.
In infants.
In infants, yes. Studies from places like the Yale Infant Cognition Center, for example, show babies preferring puppets or even just geometric shapes that display helping behaviors over those that display harming behaviors.
Wow.
Now, the interpretation is complex, of course. Even infants are processing massive amounts of data, but these studies seriously challenge the idea that we are born as purely selfish vacuums. They suggest an early, innate drive towards social reciprocity and justice.
And here's where it gets really interesting, for me at least. If evil isn't our essence, then it's just a blockage. It's a lack of cultivation or a wound that's been inflicted externally.
Exactly. And that shift in thinking changes the entire social project. If the core is good, then the goal isn't to punish inherent depravity.
The goal is to heal.
The goal is to heal the trauma, mitigate the poverty, or dismantle the systems of ignorance that led to the harmful act in the first place.
So the whole structure of our justice system, our education system, it has to focus on restoration.
Yeah.
On unblocking that natural goodness.
It's a profoundly optimistic structural model, but it's one that stands in stark contrast to the next viewpoint.
All right, now we have to pivot sharply. We're moving to viewpoint 2, which focuses on the evidence for a kind of structural brokenness and the perceived necessity of strong external restraint.
And this view is informed less by those early developmental instincts and much, much more by the harsh and often repetitive lessons of recorded history.
When advocates for the brokenness view speak, they're not looking at babies with puppets, they're looking at the historical record.
And they rely on the undeniable weight of that record. If goodness were our default setting, why has violence been so profoundly persistent, so widespread?
It's a hard question to answer.
It is. We are confronted with the repetitive nature of human cruelty, not just accidental harms, not crimes of passion, but calculated systemic violence, the Holocaust, the genocides in Rwanda and Cambodia, centuries of the slave trade, state-sponsored torture. The list is endless.
It's the capacity for extreme cruelty that's so difficult to just dismiss. It's not just that people commit harm. It's the ability to institutionalize dehumanization,
Yes.
to inflict prolonged suffering on others, and to do so with this cold, bureaucratic efficiency. If cruelty is just a blockage of our good nature, why is that mechanism so easily switched on? And why can it be sustained across such diverse cultures and eras?
The structural pessimist argues that this capacity for sustained cruelty suggests a deep-seated inclination toward violence and self-interest that is far more durable than those fragile seeds of goodness Mencius described.
So the goodness we see is just a veneer.
They would argue that, yes, it's often a veneer, a thin layer of civilization that quickly flakes off the moment you introduce real power, real fear, or real resource scarcity.
And you think about those classic psychological experiments that tested obedience and authority. I mean, the Milgram experiment, the Stanford prison experiment. They demonstrated how quickly situational factors can induce ordinary individuals, people like you and me, to inflict pain or assume these incredibly oppressive roles.
Those experiments, while ethically controversial today, provided a modern psychological analog to the historical argument. Under the right, or rather the wrong conditions, Our aggressive and dominant instincts can be activated with frightening speed.
which suggests the self-serving drive is more readily accessible than the cooperative one.
The structural pessimist says we have to design our world around that worst-case scenario. We can't afford not to.
This inherent danger, then, leads directly into the structural pessimism that defines this whole perspective. We see this consistent presence of people prioritizing their own interest, selfishness, pride, even when it actively harms vast numbers of others.
Corruption, betrayal, they are ubiquitous. They appear in every era, every institution, every ideology. There are no exceptions.
And this is where political philosophy really stakes its claim. The definitive figure here, of course, is Thomas Hobbes.
Absolutely, writing in the mid-17th century, and he was heavily influenced by the chaos and bloodshed of the English Civil War. Hobbes really couldn't afford the luxury of optimism.
That context is so vital. He wasn't just theorizing in a peaceful academic setting, he was living through the total collapse of social order.
Precisely. And what he observed was that without a strong central authority, individuals are locked in a perpetual struggle. It's driven by self-preservation, a desire for power, and a deep mutual suspicion.
He didn't trust anyone.
He concluded that humanity, left to its own devices, would live in that miserable state of nature. Therefore, political systems must assume a default dangerous nature. They must.
Which necessitates the creation of a massive, powerful state. The Leviathan.
The Leviathan. Its purpose is to compel order through the threat of overwhelming punishment. It is required to restrain those destructive, self-centered tendencies that would otherwise lead to our mutual destruction.
So the argument here is that the creation of goodness isn't an inherent quality of the individual. It's an achievement of civilization.
Yes, and it's enforced through external constraints. Goodness is defined by obedience to the social contract.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, then this perspective is really a warning. It's saying that trusting in human nature is simply naive.
It's dangerous. It demands that we acknowledge that the dangerous, twisted aspect of ourselves is real, it's powerful, and it must be structurally restrained if civilization is going to survive.
But assuming that brokenness, doesn't that run the risk of creating the very broken systems that they fear?
How do you mean?
Well, if you build a surveillance state based on the assumption that everyone is a potential criminal, doesn't that environment feed mistrust? Doesn't it encourage the very selfish behavior you were trying to eliminate in the first place? It feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's a profound philosophical risk, no doubt. But the pessimist would argue, while it might create a less free, more restrictive environment, the alternative, which is unrestrained self-interest, is guaranteed chaos. It's guaranteed suffering for the many. It enables the domination by the few powerful and cruel individuals who already exist.
So for them, a stable, albeit restrictive order is always superior.
Always superior to anarchy driven by our innate human failings.
Okay, so having explored the optimism that we are born with these sprouts of good and the pessimism that we are born basically requiring a leash, we arrive at the third core frame, the mixed potential view.
And this is where the emphasis shifts entirely, away from a fixed nature and toward the environment, toward inner conflict, and toward radical human plasticity.
So the core idea here is plasticity, that the human creature is supremely adaptable.
Right. Our evolutionary history required us to possess a kind of dual toolkit. On one hand, we have strong drives for competition and aggression. Those were necessary for, resource acquisition and defense in harsh conditions.
But on the other hand,
Equally strong are the drives for deep cooperation, empathy, and coalition building. Those were necessary for raising our highly dependent young and for coordinating complex group tasks like large-scale hunting.
so we're equipped for both war and community. We have the hardware for both the angel and the demon, so to speak.
Precisely. We are not pre-programmed to be one or the other. We are equipped for the successful expression of both. And the context. The context becomes the decider.
Which tendency dominates, the cooperative drive or the competitive aggressive one, depends entirely on our social structures, on the norms, the economic conditions, the role models we're exposed to.
It's like a moral volume control. If the structure rewards greed, short-sightedness, and cutting corners, then those impulses will naturally flourish and be perceived as successful behavior.
But if the structure rewards communal care, long-term thinking, and fairness, then those instincts are the ones that get amplified.
The strongest piece of evidence for this view, really, is the sheer societal variance we see across human cultures.
Right.
Our sources detail this anthropological contrast between, say, A highly peaceful, egalitarian hunter-gatherer society like the Semi of Malaysia, who historically lacked internal warfare, versus
versus highly militaristic, competitive, and expansionist societies that we've seen all throughout history.
the difference in behavior is dramatic yet. The people are biologically the same.
If human nature were fixed, if we were all fundamentally broken, as Frame 2 suggests, then wouldn't every society eventually devolve into the same predictable level of internal conflict?
You'd think so, but they don't. The fact that groups can sustain complex, cooperative, and relatively peaceful structures for centuries proves that the capacity for good is real, but it requires the right environmental and cultural framework to sustain it.
And this variability applies individually, too. We see remarkable transitions throughout a single person's life.
We do. People can transition from violent or cynical lifestyles to peaceful, altruistic ones, or vice versa. The capacity to heal from trauma and learn empathy, or, on the other hand, to become hardened and cruel after successive betrayals, that's just incompatible with a fixed core identity of pure good or pure evil.
It also reflects that common human experience of inner conflict. We're so often pulled in opposite directions.
Yes. The classic moral dilemma isn't choosing between two good options. It's that internal negotiation, where the part of you that wants immediate self-gratification or maybe revenge clashes with the part that seeks forgiveness or long-term morality or communal well-being.
That suggests we're not driven by a single core motivation.
It suggests we have multiple competing drives and we're constantly negotiating which impulse gets to take the wheel in any given circumstance.
So what does this all mean then? If the first two views, fundamental goodness and brokenness, are kind of deterministic, this mixed potential view introduces radical agency.
It does.
It suggests the question, are we good or evil, is the wrong question entirely. We're complex creatures whose drives are amplified or reduced by the systems we live in, and our fundamental moral project is choosing which set of impulses we're going to cultivate.
And to really appreciate the weight and nuance of these three views, we have to ground them in the foundational philosophical and religious systems that first articulated them. This is where we see the deepest explorations of moral failure and transformation.
Okay, so let's start with that synthesis you often find in the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which really seem to struggle between the Frame 1 idea of a noble origin and the Frame 2 evidence of human failure.
The synthesis is built on this concept of dignity versus damage. Humans are created in the image of God, which implies an intrinsic worth, rationality, a capacity for relationship and creation. That's the Frame 1, basically good origin story. However, the core doctrine of the fall, or original sin, suggests that this nature has been wounded, it's been corrupted, or fundamentally turned away from its intended purpose.
So the nature itself is good, but the human condition is flawed. It's easily corrupted by forces like pride or greed or fear. It's like a wound on the soul. What's the implication for transformation here?
Well, since the flaw is seen as structural, a turning away from the source of good, the solution often requires something outside the self.
External help.
Right. In these traditions, goodness must be restored or achieved through external grace or redemption. It's a realignment with the divine, because the human will, on its own, is seen as insufficient to pull itself out of its own broken state.
Now, contrast that mechanism with Eastern traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism. They also acknowledge suffering and wrongdoing, but they trace the source very differently.
Very differently. In many Eastern philosophies, the deepest self, the Atman in certain Hindu schools, is considered pure, eternal, and unchanging. Harmful action isn't a wound on the soul, it's the result of being trapped by illusion or ignorance.
So the evil isn't a flaw in the core itself, but in the layers of delusion that are covering the core.
Precisely. In Buddhism, for example, the focus is less on a sin and more on the kleshas, or the mental defilements, primarily craving, which is greed, aversion, which is hatred, and ignorance or delusion.
And these defilements cloud our potential.
They cloud the inherent potential for wisdom and compassion. The ordinary mind is clouded by attachment, which creates suffering and leads to harmful behavior.
This conceptual difference is massive. If the Abrahamic goal is an external transformation redemption, what's the Buddhist goal?
The Buddhist goal of liberation, or nirvana, is an internal transformation. It's about dissolving the illusions, extinguishing the cravings, and developing wisdom and compassion through self-discipline and meditation. You don't need external grace to fix a broken will. You need insight to peel back the layers of delusion.
Both systems see the problem, but offer radically different diagnoses.
And different prescriptions for the cure. And we find this exact same ideological struggle articulated perfectly in that classic Western debate between Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It perfectly encapsulates the brokenness view versus the goodness view in a political context.
We've touched on Hobbes already, the pessimist. His entire system, which he detailed in Leviathan, is built on the necessary imposition of order over chaos.
Hobbes was absolute in his pessimism. He believed that the competition for resources, the inherent suspicion of others, and the natural human desire for power meant that without a supreme authority, human life was guaranteed to be.
Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
That's the one. He demanded the powerful sovereign, the Leviathan, because any authority, even a tyrannical one, was fundamentally better than the chaos of the state of nature. This frames humans as dangerous, self-interested animals that require constant policing.
And Rousseau, writing about a century later, famously reversed this premise. He offers the optimistic view of society as the corrupter.
Rousseau suggested that humans are naturally good, peaceful, and guided by that natural empathy, pitié. If he saw that child about to fall into the well, he would say that feeling of pity is the uncorrupted voice of nature.
And the corruption.
The corruption, for Rousseau, came entirely from the social structure, specifically the introduction of private property, the economic inequality that resulted, and the vanity and competition this generated.
So, where Hobbes demands structure to restrain our essential nature, Rousseau demands we dismantle corrupt structures, like economic inequality, to unleash our essential nature.
Exactly. And this debate fundamentally shaped modern political thought. Many modern thinkers, looking at the sources you've gathered, often try to synthesize these two. They acknowledge that we do possess dangerous impulses, that's the Hobbesian part.
But they also recognize that societal structures, like inequality and power hierarchies, greatly amplify those impulses. They determine whether they express as cruelty or as cooperation. That's the Rousseau part.
It's the perfect encapsulation of the mixed potential view.
Shifting to modern psychology allows us to move beyond these philosophical assertions about a fixed nature and actually examine the mechanisms of moral behavior. And this perspective strongly supports that mixed potential view by linking our behavior directly to our developmental conditions.
Evolutionary biology provides the foundation here. We aren't designed for morality in some abstract sense. We're designed for survival and successful reproduction. And both cooperation and aggression were successful evolutionary strategies, depending on the environment.
So our psychological toolkit evolved to handle two critical and often clashing necessities.
The first toolkit is a competitive. It's instincts for self-defense, status seeking, resource control, aggression. The second is cooperative. Instincts for deep care, reciprocal altruism, empathy, and fairness within a defined group.
And the environment is the switch.
It's the switch. When the environment is safe and resource-rich, the cooperative instincts can be dominant. When the environment becomes hostile, chaotic, or scarce, the competitive, aggressive, self-defense instincts are immediately prioritized.
This makes our dual nature less of a moral failing and more of a functional evolutionary adaptation. It means we are equipped to be either angel or demon, depending on which instinct is rewarded by our immediate survival needs.
And this functional duality brings us to the crucial role of early development and trauma. We are so profoundly shaped by early attachment, by our caregiving, our safety, the culture we absorb. The sources heavily emphasize concepts from attachment theory.
Let's ground this with some specifics. When you think of the work of figures like Bowlby or Ainsworth, how does attachment theory solidify this idea that context shapes our core moral expression?
Well, secure attachment, being raised in love, stability, and reliable caregiving, teaches the developing brain that the world is a fundamentally safe, predictable place.
Which allows you to let your guard down.
It allows the child to develop high levels of trust and empathy because they are not constantly operating from a place of fear. They feel safe enough to explore, to cooperate, to have healthy boundaries. Their cooperative instincts get to flourish.
Whereas if the caregiving environment is chaotic, violent, or neglectful, what you call an experience of chronic trauma.
In those unstable environments, the world is encoded as hostile. The survival mechanisms are permanently engaged. The individual, whether they're a child or an adult, learns to prioritize aggression, self-protection, manipulation, or constant alertness simply because those behaviors increase their chances of survival.
It doesn't mean their capacity for empathy is gone.
Not at all, but it is deeply suppressed. It's overridden by the urgent needs of the limbic system, which governs fear and instantaneous reaction.
This just illustrates how much our context pushes us toward one end of the spectrum or the other. The psychological lens, then, it reframes the entire discussion.
It really does.
Instead of asking, are humans simply good or evil? It becomes so much more useful to ask, what specific conditions, neurological, developmental, or environmental, help the good in us grow? And what conditions feed our most destructive sides?
That reframing, focusing on conditions rather than assigning an immutable character label, is the key application of the mixed potential view. It removes the philosophical fatalism of frame two, and it places the responsibility squarely on system design.
Okay, if you, the learner, are looking for actionable insights, this is the most critical section. Because our foundational belief about human nature isn't just academic, it dictates policy, law, and even our most intimate relationships. We're going to detail the real-world consequences of adopting one view over the others.
Let's start with the justice system. If we adopt that Hobbesian view that people are fundamentally self-interested and dangerous, what do we favor?
Strong, visible control, harsh punishments, pervasive surveillance.
Exactly. The system assumes that only fear will motivate good behavior. The focus is purely on retribution and isolation.
And this can be very effective at suppressing overt crime through deterrence. But it comes at a huge cost. It can stifle rehabilitation. It can increase recidivism by hardening individuals in prison.
And it discourages the very cooperative potential that we know exists. It forces people to behave out of fear, not out of any moral conviction.
And if we look at, say, the Scandinavian justice systems, like in Norway, we see a political philosophy that seems rooted deeply in this mixed potential view.
They assume that the individual is capable of great harm and great redemption. Their systems are designed to maximize rehabilitation, to provide resources, to maintain the offender's ties to the outside world.
Why?
Because they believe the individual's environment, not their fixed essence, is the primary driver of behavior. The punishment is the loss of freedom, yes, but the goal is restoration. It's based on the belief that the noble possibility can be cultivated.
It's the difference between a punitive model focused on societal protection and a restorative model focused on societal and individual health. A profound legal and political distinction based entirely on whether you believe the individual is fundamentally broken or simply derailed by poor conditions.
And the stakes are perhaps even higher when we apply this to children. How we parent and educate is a direct consequence of our philosophical assumptions about their nature.
If children are viewed through that lens of fundamental brokenness, as little creatures requiring absolute control to prevent their inherent wickedness from manifesting,
Your methods will be strict. They'll be obedience-focused and often fear-based or shaming. The goal is to dominate the child's will to prevent their innate badness from coming out.
conversely, if children are seen as purely good and naturally wise, that overly optimistic frame one, extreme adults might fail to set necessary boundaries. They might fail to provide guidance or prepare them for the real conflicts and moral complexities they're going to face.
Which is a dangerous form of neglect by over-optimism.
The balanced, mixed potential view recognizes the potential for good, those Mencius sprouts, but it also acknowledges the competing self-serving drives and the need for external structure and modeling.
Children don't just need rules. They need environments where empathy and fairness are consistently modeled and rewarded. They need adults to structure their world so that the cooperative instincts are the ones that lead to belonging and success. The adult's role becomes cultivation, not domination.
We're teaching children which of their inherent drives is most valuable to the community they will eventually join.
Exactly.
Finally, let's bring this all back to you, the individual learner. How you answer this question about yourself fundamentally determines your self-worth, your motivation, and your capacity for change.
The extremes are personally corrosive. If you internalize the belief that I am fundamentally bad, you might be consumed by shame or hopelessness. You might believe that positive, lasting change is impossible because your true nature will always sabotage it.
That fatalism is paralyzing.
It is. But on the other hand, if you believe I am purely good and you deny the darkness within, you risk a profound self-deception.
You deny your own capacity to harm others.
And you avoid taking responsibility when you inevitably fall short. When you do fail morally, you have to find someone or something external to blame. And that leads to deflection and hypocrisy, not growth.
So the wiser stance is rooted in that mixed potential view. I carry both destructive and noble possibilities.
The personal task, then, is not to solve the inherent moral nature of the universe. It's to know both sides of your own complexity, honestly. It requires constantly choosing, training, and structuring your life and your environment toward the better possibilities.
It's a call to profound active self-management. You are not defined by the potential for darkness, but by the relentless conscious choice to cultivate the light and to build systems that support that choice. We have crossed millennia of human thought, from ancient China to modern neurobiology. Our final task, then, is to synthesize these findings into a cohesive, nuanced answer that empowers you.
The depth of this inquiry, I think, demands a rejection of simplicity. We are neither a blank slate, easily written upon, nor are we locked into a singular fixed identity of pure good or pure evil. The sources, when taken together, definitively point toward a dual capacity.
We possess strong, evolutionarily ingrained capacities for empathy, for moral insight, and cooperation, and we have equally strong, equally accessible capacities for fear, aggression, and self-deception. Our human machinery is versatile enough to fuel both Mother Teresa and a brutal dictator.
And what we ultimately become, which capacity defines our daily actions and our legacy, depends on three critical, interconnected determinants.
Okay, what are they?
First, the early developmental and safety conditions we are born into. Second, the stories, the economic pressures, and the societal systems around us that reward certain behaviors over others. And third, the cumulative active choices we and others make over time.
This complex view is profoundly empowering, I think, because it refutes the idea that we are just victims of an innate fixed nature. It places the power back into our hands to decide what kind of species we actually want to be.
And that is the core philosophical and practical takeaway here. This nuanced view doesn't remove responsibility. It deepens it, exponentially. If context shapes character, then we are fundamentally responsible for shaping the context.
We're responsible not only for our individual choices, but also for the laws we pass, the education we fund, the inequalities we tolerate, the workplaces we design.
All of it. Because those systems shape the next generation's sense of what humans are capable of. If we build a system that assumes brokenness and rewards self-interest, we are very likely to get broken behavior.
And if we build a system that structurally rewards nobility, cooperation, and long-term care,
We are much more likely to see more of it. This deep dive shows that perhaps the most valuable answer to the question of human nature is the one that demands the most from us.
which is
Acknowledging the darkness, that Hobbesian danger, without denying the light, the Mencius sprout. And recognizing that in the absence of fatalism, intentional context is destiny.
we have explored the notion of fundamental goodness through Mencius' sprouts, inherent brokenness through the doctrine of original sin, the necessity of the Leviathan in Hobbes, and the corruption of society in Rousseau. And the common thread uniting the most sophisticated thinkers across all these perspectives is that our potential is vast, but requires active choices and intentional environments to steer it toward the better outcome.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to carry forward. If we accept that systems and context bring out the worst or the best in us, what single tangible change in your own immediate sphere of influence, your workplace, your family's boundaries, your community's norms, what single change would most effectively feed the noble possibilities over the destructive ones? Think about the environment you're building, because that environment is actively shaping the choices and potentially the very moral character of those around you.